With the fact that IDW Comics is still going to continue Friendship is Magic, the biggest question that any fans would have is what will the IDW Comics address? Will they continue the show in their own unique way, or will they go in a different direction? Well, I can tell you honestly from experience that when a show, the animated portion of a franchise in a show, um, comes to an end, but the comic still continues, what that does is it opens a door to freedom. Maybe not a lot of freedom, but just enough freedom to where the creative staff of the comic book or the comic adaptation can do a lot more with less restrictions. Because if you have an animated adaptation of that same franchise going on at the same time, you could still get away with a few things you wouldn't be able to do in the animated portion, but you still have restrictions. But once that animated portion comes to an end, those restrictions are somewhat lifted and you have a bit more freedom. A good example to me growing up was Marvel Comics Transformers comic book that was going on at the same time as the animated series. I mean, yes, it did begin the craze of Transformers along with the toys that led to an animated series, but the biggest difference between both is they had somewhat of a similar continuity and tie-in at times, but the comic was a lot more darker. It was a lot more violent. They could get away basically with doing things in the comic that they couldn't do in the animated series. You know, until they got to the 1986 movie, that is. But up to that point, you couldn't really do anything outside of that, or within, I should say, that animated series, unless it was in a different kind of format, and that's where the comics came in. So, even so, basically, when the Transformers G1 series was going on, the comic was happening at Marvel, and Marvel at times would actually kill off in some of those stories and issues some semi main characters, some main characters, do all kinds of crazy stuff that was outside of the limitations that the animated series had given them. So I bring that up here because, My Little Pony Friendship is Magic, the IDW comics have a chance to kind of expand a lot more with less limitations restricted on them. Because yes, even though, like I said, they were able to do some things that they wouldn't be able to do in the animated series, they still had some restrictions laid upon them. With the series coming to an end, the animated portion that is, the comic book has the potential to have a little bit more freedom. Another good example, in my opinion, is Sonic SatAM, Sonic the Hedgehog. When that series came to an end, animated-wise, somewhat abruptly after season 2 came to an end, the comic continued on and not only expanded and utilized some of the continuity from the animated series and even adapted some of the episodes, but they also expanded and went into areas of a mature state. They tackled certain subjects, issues, stuff like that they didn't do so much of in the 2 seasons the show was on ABC. But they were able to do so in the comic book. They were able to cross lines sometimes, not so much, but they were able to cross lines in a way to where you'd be like, well, wait a minute, we know the Saturday morning series was dark, but it wasn't this dark, or it wasn't this complex, it wasn't this mature, it wasn't this dramatic. And these were areas that the creative staff at Archie Comics at the time, who was publishing the book, was able to go because they had less limitations. Yes, they still had some restrictions and limitations, but not as much on them as to when the animated series was on. And that's again where I look at IDW's possibility and potential here with the My Little Pony series. We see them already tackling complex stories. We see them already getting a little darker at times, more dramatic, more serious, but still keeping that comedic tone that people have come to associate not just with the animated series, but with the comics. But the question is, what will the staff tackle? What will the staff be able to finally do once the cuffs are finally off? I mean, they're kind of slightly loose right now, but when the animated portion of the franchise ends, and those cuffs are finally off, the question's going to be exactly where will they go? What areas will they explore? What story arcs will they tackle that the animated series and the creative staff on the animated series couldn't do? Honestly, to me, there's a lot of opportunities in front of them. I mean, a lot of people were happy with the perfect pair and the fact that we got to know about Applejack's parents and even see a cameo of them in going to Seed in a flashback. But the biggest question is, what more can we learn about them? And would Applejack ever finally come face to face with them? To me, that's potential story writing there. Like, they could do some kind of time travel situation where Applejack can actually go back in the past and find out exactly what happened to her parents and maybe try to prevent it. The opportunity presents itself right there in front of the IDW comic staff, because honestly, this is something that the animated creative staff could have tackled, but probably would have been a little too dark, a little too much complex for not just the adult audience, the adult bronies and Pega sisters, but mainly the still targeted younger audience, because they wouldn't know what's going on and maybe it would go over their heads or something. Another thing that I think a lot of fans hope they will tackle is spike in rarity and sparity. Because it seems to me that if you if you read the Nightmare Rarity arc, one of the first major arcs in the comic, in the final panel that we see of that entire arc is the main group sitting on a hillside, looking up at the sky, looking up at the moon and the stars, and you have Spike right next to Rarity, and Rarity's holding him tight, and there's a heart emoji above that. And even before that, Spike's the one that kind of is the last essential ingredient to free Rarity from the nightmare's hold on her, the nightmare magic's hold on her, by basically telling her how much she means to him and that he wants her to come back to him. I mean, they even had him go as far as to say the 3 words almost to try to help free her, and that is, I love you. So the potential there to finally explore that is opened. And the comic, in my opinion, especially when the animated series is done, has a lot more freedom and leeway to do so. And I don't think the comic staff would be afraid of saying, you know what, this is a popular ship. Let's see what we can do and let's run with it. Let's run with it and see what we can do. So I wouldn't put it past them to do something like that. I mean, here's the thing. No one ever thought in the Sonic comic, when it was under the Archie comic license, that Antoine would ever get anybody, that he'd always try to win the heart and crush on Sally. But inevitably he did get somebody, and it was Bunny. Nobody saw that coming. For Antoine, this cowardly French character, to actually have won the heart unexpectedly of this half cyborg character named Bunny Rabbit. No one knew that was coming. No one saw that coming. And as much as we as supporters and shippers of Spike and Sparity, are pretty much saying, hey, it's up to interpretation, there's too much evidence throughout the series and even towards the end that, says, otherwise, besides, hey, there is something there between these two more than friendship. We have to admit that basically You know, the series has not really come out and said anything officially. And honestly, we don't expect them to. But the comic, on the other hand, is a different story because that would be something that we could see coming, but we don't know when it would come. It could be one of those situations to where here's an issue focusing on Spike and Rarity, maybe them going on a mission or an adventure, and finally it comes out in the open that they mean more to each other than just friendship. So who knows? Who knows? But that's one thing that could get tackled. Honestly, it could, because fans would like to see those that support Sparity for at least the comic to come out and say, "Hey, we're confirming it." That yes, you did get sort of a semi-confirmation, even though the show staff didn't come right out and say it, that Spike and Rarity are basically more than just friends now, that there's something more between them. The comic, I believe, wouldn't be afraid to tackle that. And even, like I said, hey, and maybe like I said, probably think to themselves or agree that, hey, this is a very popular ship in the fandom, let's run with it and see what happens. I wouldn't put it past them to do that. I wouldn't. So there's that possibility. There's possibilities to looking at Celestia and Luna's past and origin to see how they became alicorns and they became the rulers of Equestria. There's a chance to kind of explore situations in between the timeline skip, supposed timeline skip, if you will, of, that takes place rumoredly between the the three final episodes. And there's opportunity there. So, honestly, the comic has a lot of options and opportunities in front of them that they could actually explore more further into detail than they ever could while the show was currently running. But once the show ends and those cuffs are fully off, I believe nothing's really going to be off limits for them. I mean, again, like I said, anything is possible. The potential is right in front of them. The opportunities I mentioned that they can explore are right there. Nothing's stopping them. Other ideas too, like they can do a story of Twilight settling in as her new role as ruler of Equestria, and how the friends, are expanding on their new roles as, co-rulers of Equestria and stuff like that. All this kind of stuff. Is there just ripe for the picking and for the exploration of. And I don't think anybody could blame IDW and its creative staff if they want to do something like that. Because to me, like I said, the comic, even while the show is currently running, has a little bit more leeway. Not as much as it potentially could have once the show finally comes to an end, but it could. But basically, it has that potential to go further than the show ever has. And I think they know that. I really think they know that. So, will the comic basically explore MLP, Friendship is Magic, post season 9? More further than what it's currently doing right now? Possibly. But we'll have to, in my opinion, wait and see what they do. I think, honestly, again, the things I have mentioned is right in front of them. And all they have to do is take the opportunity to look at some of those ideas and run with them and give them a shot and see what happens. But what do you guys think? Let me know down below what your thoughts are, and I will talk to y'all later.